For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter. So then I was thinking, I know we're in Dunks, but I kind of want to try that Halloween Whopper, because what is a black bun about, really?
Really?
How do you not try that? It's a black bun.
You don't try it by not going to Burger King and ordering one, I would imagine.
But it's got A1 sauce baked into the bun, Craig. It's baked into the bun.
It's black bread, not actually like dark bread. It's black bread.
It's
Russ.
baked
That's
in.
what happens when bread rots.
All right, well, fine. Well, let's just have a donut. And hey, Craig, is that Dean Gilbert? Hey, Dean.
It looks like Dean to me.
How's
Dean?
it going, man?
Guys.
What are you doing all the way down here in Dunks? I thought you were like
Dean, put that black bunned burger away. You're in Dunkin' Donuts.
You Americans have a very strange way of making burgers.
Well, now, do you have Burger Kings in Canada?
We do.
And do they celebrate Halloween in Canada?
We do.
And do they make black buns in Canada at Burger King?
I have not seen any black buns.
All right.
Oh.
So 2 out of 3 is not bad, but that's interesting that they don't have them.
Meatloaf said.
It is what Meatloaf said.
Yeah.
So Dean,
But we have poutine, so
you
there.
do.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that? I learned something about poutine. A, I've been pronouncing it wrong all these years, but B, here in New England, several restaurants serve poutine, but they don't do it properly because generally there's no cheese curds on it. It's just like shredded mozzarella or something on top, which is wrong. For those who don't know poutine out there, it's French fries with a gravy on top with then cheese curds. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yeah, so cheese curds on top. And generally what I did not know is I thought poutine was an entire Canada thing, but it's not. It's actually more of a Quebec right side of Canada thing, right?
It was, but really in the last 5 years, just about any restaurant.
Well, but let me say this. When I was in Vancouver, which is on the left side of Canada, they made poutine like we get it here in New England, which is wrong. They did not have the cheese curds on it.
Did they really?
They did. I know. So I don't know if that's because Vancouver is confused like New England is, or if
ridiculous.
If this is becoming a thing and people are like adverse to curds and they're moving on to mozzarella. I don't even know.
It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. But anyway, we're not here to talk about poutine.
There's a place in Manchester that does it with curds.
Okay, well, where is that place? Well, anyway, talk to me off the air.
I can't remember where it is. I can't remember.
There is a place in Maine called Duck Fat that actually makes the right kind of poutine, and they put it and they fry everything they make there in duck fat, which is sort of interesting, but different topic. Well, since we have Dean, welcome. Good to have you here. And of course, for those who don't know, Dean is a RPG writer as well as a avid RPG player. Is that a fair characterization?
It is.
All right, good. And
Lord of all Lord of all things, RPG.
Indeed. And one of the things
this Dunkin' Donuts has some crazy
acoustics really well.
Just turn your face into that corner, Russ. Just turn and talk into the corner.
All right.
It's pretty amazing.
So one thing I've noticed about...
Oh, you want me to stop, Russ?
No, keep
you
going.
don't like me doing this, Russ? Am I wandering off point?
A little.
Does this drive you a little crazy, Russ? As we wander further and further away from how to create a role-playing climax.
See, this is what I have to deal with, Dean, every week. It's like clockwork.
Dean, laugh with me at Russ's expense. No.
Hey, we got to take the soundboard away.
It's still very nice.
I do have a soundboard. I have a soundboard, and I'm not afraid to use it.
Anyway,
okay, fine. Go ahead and talk. I'll go.
Thank you. One of the big challenges I think that I run into, Dean, and you tell me if you've had this problem before, is that when you do an RPG, you have moments that are going to be really big pivotal moments for the adventure, right? Where maybe the party's finally tracked down that big bad guy, or they're about to save the town, or whatever, and you have sort of that climactic moment in the story, right? And you want it to really be awesome and to involve all the players. And for some reason or the other, just the way it breaks, one player does all the work, or it ends up being a battle, and so, the paladin or whoever walks up and kicks butt, but everybody else is sort of like on the side or whatever. Or you've got some players who are much more sort of support cast, and when you're not in combat, they're great, but when you're in combat, they're not that, and so now you've got a combat situation. How do you include them? And so how do you? So that'd be kind of fun to talk about how you build a climactic moment like that actually works for as many of the party members as you can get.
Yeah, because it's really important to get the ending good, because there's a little psychological thing that humans have. It's called the peak end effect. And what that means is that you will consider something being good on the basis of the average of the whole thing and the very ending. So the ending can actually be as important as the entire rest of the adventure of the campaign.
Yeah, and how many times do you hear people say things like that with the movie? Like, I was with it, I was liking the movie till the very end, the ending sucked, and you walk out like,
Mass Effect.
You know? Yeah, I know. We talked about that before. Right. So you get to the end, you're like, oh, and it just like ruins your whole experience. Even though in a video game, especially, you've been playing this game for like 100 hours. Exactly. So like, can their last 10 minutes really ruin 100 hours of gameplay? It kind of can if you're not careful. And I think your characters are the same way. They've been playing with you some of these, some of the stories and building up for session after session, maybe even months, maybe even years. And you get this big climax coming, and you really want it to be sort of, climactic. Right, for everyone. So Dean, what are some tricks you've employed? Because you did, some of them are built into the mechanics of some of these games. Some of the games have it sort of give you good guidance on it. And sometimes you have to just kind of be creative as a GM. But what are some things you've done to kind of help get those moments right?
Well, it's kind of interesting because admittedly, I haven't done that a lot. In fact, there's only really 2 situations I can think of that I did a really good job on that. One was the game that we played at Gen Con.
Aren't we the lucky ones then?
Yes, you are. And the other one was the 4th edition campaign that we played, and I ended it around 16th level because it got a little long. But basically, it's really important to make sure that all of the players are going to have something important to do. And it doesn't necessarily even have to do with like doing the most damage, but they just have to be doing something that is important to resolve that the final battle or conflict or what have you.
Yeah, I just had something like this happen. So I did it wasn't really a climactic moment, but in the RPG we're playing now. So I'm playing 5e now with my family, as I mentioned on the show a couple times. And so we were trying this out camping, and I'm talking about this more in achievements, but we were playing this camping, and I decided I didn't want to do a lot because we didn't have our table and all of our normal supplies, but they're in the middle of a battle in a tavern. And it was really going to be the only thing we did this evening was this one battle. And I realized that I had the problem where I've got, some characters who are really, really good. There's a bard, for example. My oldest daughter's a bard, and she has taken the skills all where she can disguise herself, she can sneak around, she's got all these support events she can do, but she's not really like for an MMO, she's not a DPS class, right? She doesn't throw a lot of damage. So she's not in this particular battle, she's not going to do a lot, and I realized as it was playing out, there were a couple things I could have done as a GM that I didn't do, and it's kind of like the complications we've talked about before in the main show, which is, they were fighting in a tavern, and the goal was to get these bad guys out of the tavern so that their party there could stay the night. These bad guys were there kind of buying the whole tavern out and being jerks. So they're trying to get them out. So they're fighting them. And I just let it play out as a fight. But I realized afterwards, hindsight being 20/20, that what I could have done, I started this experiment with my party where I just do things. I try to make the spells realistic and come at a price. So like if you're inside of a tavern and you cast Burning Hands, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you're inside of a tavern and you cast Thunderwave, there are going to be things that happen other than just knocking the bad guys over, right? You're going to, like, he's like, my brother John's like, I cast Thunderwave, and he slams the bad guys into the back wall. Oh, and by the way, the window to the left just blew out. And of course, the tavern owner hiding behind the bar is yelling, "What are you doing to my tavern? I thought you were trying to," so all of a sudden, now if she casts Burning Hands, what I should have done, here's what I didn't do as well as I could have. I should have had Burning Hands like at the drapes on fire. Because now you've got a situation where there's combat still happening, but someone's got to save the tavern. So each round, the characters who aren't combat class guys can be doing other things, and trying to, so if you can add a little more activity to even in the middle of a battle, all of a sudden you're making it complicated, making it interesting, and having all these problems to solve, and at the same time, there's things for not combat people to do. Or if you're in a situation maybe where there's, there's more characters than there are bad guys or something like that. So I try to think about that kind of stuff. That's an example of me not doing it well, but then looking back, I'm like, oh, I would totally do that differently next time.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, one thing I would avoid doing in a climax, and ironically enough, I'm going to talk about how I did exactly this thing in our Guardians game, but I would not introduce any characters that the party has not already met before.
Yes.
And a really good example, and I guess I need to do a spoiler warning here for the Red Hand of Doom adventure that came out for 3rd edition. So if you don't want to get spoiled by that adventure, which is an amazing adventure, just maybe skip ahead a little bit. Anyways, at the end of the adventure, when you're fighting the big bad guy who's been causing all the problems, you finally defeat him, and then you have to fight an aspect of Tiamat, who is actually the power behind the whole thing. And when I ran that adventure, I just ended it at that last, when they killed the big bad guy, because I just looked at that combat and I went, why is this happening? Because they had no inclination.
Yeah, there wasn't any hints or anything for it, so they didn't.
No, there was just. I mean, there might have been some hints, but often the players aren't going to see them, or they'll miss them or something like that. But like I said, though, that's exactly what I did for your adventure.
Right.
But I figured I could get away with it for one reason, and that's because you, as the players, I knew were familiar with Ultron.
Right.
And so even if your characters might be going like, who the heck is this robot guy?
Right.
You as players would be going like, whoa, okay, this is not good.
Well, it worked too. I think that was kind of meta, but it worked because everybody just seen the new Avengers movie too. So you're like, oh, so it's got the new Avengers time. So that was kind of meta. I think that falls into the rules of making it epic. But I'm interested in hearing, Dean, you mentioned that you did a really good job of it in 4E at the end. And how did you do it there? Because, the Guardians game we played, which is based on leverage, which we're going to talk about in the main show a little bit more, it has mechanics built in to kind of make the finale awesome, right? So
yeah, like the session builds to
the flashbacks thing where each character has to contribute. They're kind of given that opportunity to do something cool. So I love that about the game. It kind of forces a climax, and the DM is getting ideas from each player of how to make this whole thing play out in a way that each person's contributions matter. And so you're really kind of setting it up and kind of pausing the whole game and saying, okay, tell us a story of how you guys are about to beat this guy. It's kind of what happens, right? And then it's the die rolls at the end.
Before I get into that, I just want to say one thing about that Guardians adventure.
Yeah.
One thing that I wasn't 100% sure if everybody would be able to do something that would be really, really important to that end. But what I wanted to do was make sure, because your daughters were playing, especially your youngest daughter was playing for the first time.
Right.
I wanted to make sure that if anybody had a cool climax, it was them. Yeah. And I hope that worked.
No, you did. It totally did. She was enthralled. Like, it was funny. So my oldest daughter felt a little intimidated because, so she was just to clarify, but she was playing Rocket, and Rocket was, and Dean had set it up so that, which makes sense, that Rocket was sort of the idea guy, right? So she felt it took her a couple minutes or a few rounds to kind of get the sensation of, she's a little intimidated. That's all. But the youngest daughter, Kit, she was right into it the whole time. She was like right engaged, right into it, loved the whole thing. And Rose at the end also thought it was fantastic, but it was just the intimidation mode of being like the center of attention for a bit. But Kit loved it. It definitely worked, Dean. She got right into the whole thing and got the whole premise and how it was supposed to work.
Good. So anyways, the campaign, I have to remember a little bit here, but I seem to recall spending a long time thinking how the combat would actually go out. And there was a lot of things that would be happening during the combat. It wasn't just going to be you set up your final, opposition, which in this case, ironically enough, was an aspect of Tiamat. And you don't sort of put the miniatures down and have this big fight. There has to be more events than just the, throwdown, long combat that you just slog through. So that there were events that would happen during the battle. Like, for example, there was, a little child was all of a sudden, separated from her mom. And so they had to go rescue her. Although, of course, as it turns out, the the little child was a doppelganger. So that didn't turn out so well for them.
Never trust a little kid, Dean.
Yeah. But yeah, and I made sure that there were like lots of, things they could do. They could jump from rooftop to rooftop fighting the enemies that had basically ambushed them, at the end of the campaign. And so there was just a lot of stuff that each of the players could do rather than just meet in the middle and go smash everybody.
Yeah, I think because another thing we're talking about, so we've mentioned quite a bit that what's really important is that all the players feel like they're contributing. But another thing, you mentioned, you struck a memory for me that's not something I did, but my brother does quite a bit. So my brother is also an avid role player, mostly Dungeons and Dragons, and he's a really, really passionate and very dedicated dungeon master. And one of the things he does, in addition to trying to make sure all the characters are sort of involved in the finale, he does what you used to describe, which is he plays through how the final battle is probably going to happen with all the characters, and he looks for spots where, oh crap, if the bad guy doesn't have some kind of counter for this, it'll be trivial. In a situation where like the wizard casts web, all the bad guys are webbed up and they're pretty much all dead now, and there's two problems with that. One, it's very anticlimactic because it's almost like, Mace Windu and Jango Fett, done, kind of situation. And then the second part of it is the wizard just did all the work. So he gets all the glory, and everybody else is just like, well, I'm glad I came. So he kind of looks for that sort of stuff, and then either, it doesn't always have obviously he can't think of everything, but he doesn't have a counter for every single situation, but he has situations can arise where like you think the web's going to work, and then, this comes out and doesn't. So he has these little moments where it's like, you think you got him, then there's a counter swing and a whole thing, and it works. He does a really good job of this, and you're mentioning of playing the fight through your head. That's one of those areas where you probably, as a GM, we do want to spend a little time of thinking about how are the characters going to try to approach this, and how can I make sure A, it's not a cakewalk, and B, that there's not a one-trick pony to get by here, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't. Most of the time, I try to keep combats short as possible.
Yeah.
In 13th Age and 4th Edition especially was a little tough, but 13th Age, usually combats run about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. But for a climactic battle, I sort of let that go a little looser. And, if you spend 2 hours on the most important battle of the campaign, I don't think that's a problem.
I agree with you. I agree. You want it to be great. Now, does the climax always have to be a battle?
No, but it's usually the easiest, especially if it's Dungeons and Dragons or some similar game.
It's true, yeah. Have you done any climaxes that weren't battles?
I mean, the only ones that I could think of would be games that don't necessarily have that are fully about fighting. Like in Leverage, only 1/5 of that game is fighting. Mm-hmm. There's four other roles in the game, and each of them has a completely equal amount. You've got the hackers, and you've got the grifters who are doing the cons and stuff like that. And so in a game like that, it probably isn't going to be a battle. I mean, the guy who's the hitter, the guy who's doing all the fighting, probably does his flashback smacking somebody upside the head, but
right.
But the rest of them won't. But I think that it really probably depends on the game. If it's Dungeons and Dragons or 13th Age or some heroic fantasy or something like that, it's pretty hard to think of situations where it wouldn't be a fight. In some games, it might be a chase. Mm-hmm. If the game does chases really well, or a hacking battle or wizards battle, but even then you're starting to get into a fight again. Because really, a fight is just conflict between two people that requires physical stuff. So, in order to have a good climax, you need a good conflict at some point.
Yep.
And so, for it not to be a combat, especially games with lots of combat rules, I think it's probably pretty hard to actually get one that's really satisfying if it doesn't include that.
Yeah, I think oftentimes I've done climaxes that were escapes sometimes, right? Which is essentially what you're talking about, either a chase to get away or the building's on fire, you got to get out. And there's maybe combat happening around it, but the goal isn't just toe-to-toe, kind of situations. Craig, what about you've been a GM for quite a few games, and
yes.
What kind of techniques do you employ to make sure the climaxes are cool?
I kind of do. Well, I haven't done a campaign in a long time. I've done linked one-offs, I guess. And when I do a one-off, I kind of build it all towards that climax. So everything that's happening that night sort of serves that ultimate battle that I have in mind and is sort of gearing everybody towards that. So that's where I start by planning is what do I want my big final battle to look like and where do I want it to be and who do I want involved in that? And then I work backwards from there to like where do I want my players to run into these people, and it's more of a railroad scenario than you would want with a campaign, but it kind of ensures that although you don't know how that ultimate battle is going to go, you at least know that they're eventually going to get there, and that then that battle is going to take place. You don't know, for instance, that some large-headed friend of yours is going to jump onto the top of a building with a jetpack and peel open an access hatch and jump onto the final boss monster without any backup. You don't know that.
Who would do that? That's insane.
I don't know. You can't stop that from happening. I mean, I guess I could.
Right.
But I think in my experience, you were rolling insanely well and using things like melt-a-bombs on an unreinforced warehouse roof.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah. So you can lead an RPG party to water, but you can't make them drink it in the order you want them to drink it in.
Well, it was a climactic death. You got to give me that.
It was, and it ultimately resulted in the death of the entire party.
Right. Which
I don't think would have happened if everybody had been together and kind of like moving forward in the way I intended. So maybe I didn't railroad it enough.
It's a perfectly fine climax. You know,
it was a valid climax.
You don't have to win to have a great ending.
Right. Well, I mean, orgasm in French, of course, is petite death. So you just you just found yourself the grand death, I guess.
Yes, that was.
So you can say that climax was orgasmic.
Oh dear!
See, no.
It's a family show, isn't it?
I was hoping we get through this entire segment without ever making that reference.
Yeah, I mean, it might have been for the giant tyrannid, hive tyrant, but who knows?
Yes.
You know, one thing that I would caution too is that if you're, and this is more of a campaign climax thing, but if your campaign is in danger of ending prematurely, skip to the end and make sure you have that climax.
That's what she said. I'm sorry.
That was totally intentional too.
Stop there.
Dean. Dean.
He set it up. I mean, he just totally set it up right there.
Premature, Dean. Rush to the climax, Dean.
He went right there.
Did Russ pay you for that?
No.
Man, I couldn't come up with that if I tried.
That's what she said.
Jeez. Yeah, so well, hopefully you guys got something out of this beyond
I don't know what
some
you got
sick
out of it.
jokes. But I think it's great. I think that's really the key is to make sure everybody's involved and try to make sure there's no simple solutions, but of course it is solvable, and don't put a hive tyrant under the roof. That's what we learned tonight.
That is not what we learned, Mr. Wakeland.
That's what I learned.
Well, that might have been what you learned, but then you didn't learn the right lesson. But yeah, it also helps if you know what characters are going to be in your party ahead of time, because you can then build challenges for them that step up towards the climax.
Well, I do think it's important that you don't completely craft your climax until you've played a bit with your party and kind of know. Right, like their
and if you're not going to know who they are, have ideas in your head, like, okay, if they're going to be thieves, I want this kind of thing. If there's going to be clerics, I want this. And so have something a moment where everybody can shine right up at the end, like, maybe not that last blow that's going to be struck, but in the final battle or just previous to it, to have something, some puzzle or, something that they can really do where they would shine. But if you're going to have that all planned out ahead of time, make sure there's other ways around it in case they're dead by the time they get there.
Right.
Because making new characters is fun.
It is fun.
Not necessarily at the climax, though.
Oh, dear. Well, Dean, thank you so much for joining us here in Dunkin' Donuts and straying away from that evil Tim Hortons. We appreciate that.
You do.
And we'll have you back here on the main show in about a week.
Looking for those black buns.
Yeah, Black Buns is awesome.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.